Okay, in the last video, I talked about the Cosmovision of the Huarochirí manuscript in a very small and perhaps overly simplistic nutshell. Bear in mind there's a lot more that you can get out of it. But in this video, we'll see if we can dig beneath the surface a bit to get at some of the history that's contained within the Huarochirí manuscript itself. And we'll also be looking at how the Cosmovision might link to the history. And I say this quite tentatively, because it has to be tentative in many ways. So, where do we start when it comes to the history? Well, perhaps the first place to look is the cosmic battle between Pariakaka, the deity of the Huarochirí, and Huayayo Caroinchu. Now, before Pariakaka's birth or his arrival on the scene, Huayayo is the god who ruled the region. And if you note from the details in the Huarochirí manuscript, his land was hot, it was humid, birds from the tropics flew, tropical plants grew. It sounds like an Eden, an Edenic place. But for one thing, Huayayo was a cruel god. He demanded human sacrifice. Well, I say cruel, this is from my perspective, but also from the perspective of the narrator as well. So Huayayo is a god that demanded human sacrifice, and he demands the sacrifice of one of the two children that a family could bear. So they could bear, each family can have two children, and they've got to give up one child to be sacrificed to Huayayo Caroinchu. And the manuscript describes how the one that was loved the most would be kept while the other would be sacrificed, which is pretty harsh, really, when you think about it. It would be a paradise, but for this. And anyway, Pariakaka attacks Huayayo, and he attacks him with rain, with floods, with lightning, and Huayayo responds, again cataclysmically, with fire that reaches to the heavens. And in the process, according to the story, whole mountains were crushed. A lake called Muyucocha was formed, and Pariakaka remains victorious. Now, what happens then? Well, Huayayo is chased out of the region down to the coast, where he becomes the god of the dog-eating Huancas, as I mentioned in the earlier videocast. But importantly, though, it's not just Huayayo that's chased out. It's not just him and his wife. It also mentions the changing of the climate. So from being a tropical hot land, this same land becomes a wet, frozen land. This is the land now of Pariakaka. He's changed the way the landscape is. He's changed its climate. It also mentions that Pariakaka attacked Huayayo's people. This is the Yunka. And he drives them down to the coast, where they were forced to converted voluntarily to the worship of Pariakaka. So you've got a kind of a religious coercion going on here. How can we read it? Well, we can indeed read it in terms of climatic change, climatic disasters. Certainly the region is known for violent and extremely dangerous mudslides or huaicos. And you see this here in this video clip of a huaico that's moving through Lunahuaná. And during the rainy season, these huaicos, they can carry everything before them. They're extremely dangerous, and they bury whatever's left underneath. You can see the kind of mesmerizing serpentine nature of the mass of liquid sludge. It's not moving slowly. You can see how powerful it is. You can see how it takes form. You get a sense of the sheer power of its descent. And you can also get a sense of why water is described in the Huarochirí manuscript why it takes on a destructive, predatory male divine force, just by looking at this video clip. So yeah, this battle could well be talking about a climactic disaster. And this is how the seminal historian Maria Rostorowski de Diez-Canseco, that doesn't roll off the tongue very easily, but yeah, that's her name, Maria Rostorowski de Diez-Canseco, brilliant historian. She reads it in a different way. She reads it as the historical memory of the migration of people. So what she's suggested is that you have the nomadic pastoral Yauyos of the highlands. They begin to encroach on the lands of the sedentary Yunka, and they violently attack them. And they drive them out. These are warmer, fertile lands, by the way. They drive them out and towards the coast. But, and this is what you see later on in the Huarochirí manuscript, that you see a description of how they eventually intermarry and they form a shared kinship culture under the patronage of the deity Pariakaka. So, that's Rostorowski's hypothesis, and it's a very plausible hypothesis. Now, without sufficient archaeological evidence, now Rostorowski does bring archaeological evidence to it, but without sufficient evidence, it's very difficult to pinpoint the details. But still, for the purposes of the peoples of Huarochirí, it is a very, very plausible idea that this is the historical memory that's being conserved in their oral tradition, as is their memory of enmity with the Huancas and their interaction with the Incas. So they talk in terms of passive resistance, really. And that's the story of the vacillation of the Huaca deity Macawisa, who's the son of Pariakaka. So what happens there is that the Huacas and the deities are summoned by the Inca Tupac Yupanqui to do battle with rebel provinces, provinces that are rebelling against the Inca Empire. And in the end, so Macawisa vacillates. He's not sure whether to go or not. But in the end, he does decide to go, and he offers to defeat these rebels, and then he does defeat them. And the account states how afraid Tupac Yupanqui was. Tupac Yupanqui says, he could also destroy me. So what might you do? How can you read that historically? Well, firstly, you can read into it that the Inca has a very healthy respect for powerful regional deities, quite wisely. But also, you can read into it that the Incas used these deities and they ordered the loyalty of their peoples by controlling the Huacas. It's also plausible to, historically speaking, to assume that Macawisa did not go to these battles alone. Rather, he's carried into the battle by the Yauyos themselves, who are fighting for the Incas to subdue the rebel provinces. And we do have sufficient historical evidence in the chronicles to know that Andean groups did carry their deities into battle, and that the Incas did use subdued peoples to fight other subdued peoples. Well, we'll talk about to fight other peoples that they wanted to subdue, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about the Incas. So yeah, we can assume that the same is true of the Huarochirí peoples and Macawisa. Macawisa may well have gone into battle against peoples rebelling against the Incas, but the Yauyos would have gone with him. Yeah. Okay, so that's all I'll say for the moment about what we can glean historically out of the Huarochirí manuscript. There's plenty more, but that's where I'll leave it for now. And I'll just sum up what we've got. We've got a text that reflects the cosmovision of a number of peoples from a particular Andean region. This is not an Incaic text. It's not Inca. And it makes it very clear to the reader that this is the case. So this means that it quickly becomes obvious that we'll run into trouble if we talk in terms of an Incaic, an Inca, or an entirely Andean cosmovision. This is a Huarochirí cosmovision. Yet, having said this, there are certain elements to the stories that show clear pan-indigenous parallels. So in particular, the cycles of life. It's important to see that these cycles are quite different, though, depending on what the geology of the area is that you're talking about, what the ecology is, what the history of the peoples is, and to whom these stories belong. So yeah, there are cyclical time is described in these in the Huarochirí myths, and but it's different to other cyclical times as described in other memories that were recorded by other indigenous Americans. So in the Huarochirí stories, the water cycle and its relationship with the earth, so the male water cycle and its relationship with the female earth, is absolutely paramount. Now, historically speaking, the manuscript's quite difficult to pin down, but as with all of these texts, what you can do is infer a broad history of certain particular peoples from the stories that are told. These are, after all, collective historical memories within the framework of a particular cosmovision. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you very much.